thank you everyone for coming tonight. We all know you only showed up for the promise of food. Since you've already been stuffed, now you're stuck. You might as well listen to me bring up a few points I have on misconceptions and stigmas surrounding addiction. Picture a moment in your life when you made a mistake that you continue to regret having made to this day. Now imagine that for the rest of your life, the world, society, and the people you know and care about will judge you based on this mistake. Could you handle these constraints these judgments would confine you to? Could you take the pressure? Can you imagine forever being reminded that you are this mistake and nothing more? That is what it is like to live with the label addict today. No one knows the circumstances that led to your mistake, but they'll all make assumptions, and that will be your circumstances, whether it's true or not. No one lived through your mistake, but they will condemn you for how you survived this mistake. No one knows what it is like to live with the mistake you made, but they will all tell you how you must have wanted this life having made the mistake to begin with. This is what it is like to live with the label addict today. Hello, my name is Nicole, and I am an addict. I have over 3 years in recovery and am certified recovery coach, and am currently pursuing my certification as a substance abuse counselor. Today I'm going to address several misconceptions and stigmas surrounding addiction and how they can affect society's opinion. Addiction is a choice, not a disease. This is a statement that every addict has been confronted with. To be honest, before I became addicted, I had this very same opinion. The truth is that I did in fact choose to use, to take the first hit because I didn't realize when I took the first hit that I was someone with an addictive personality disorder. I just wanted to have some fun, escape my mind for a little bit. No one wakes up one day and decides to become an addict. It's not like us addicts went to school as kids and say, hey, when I grow up, I'm gonna be a junkie, a crackhead, a dope fiend. When I grow up, I wanna lose everything I care about, live on the streets, and turn into someone I no longer recognize in the mirror. Do any of you guys remember career day in school? Do you remember seeing the booth for how to be an addict? I must have missed it. It surely wasn't the dream I had for myself. I made a lapse in judgment the night I chose to smoke crack for the first time, and I berated myself for the entirety of my addiction. Why can't you just quit? Just stop. Don't call your dealer. Put down the phone. I'm not going to use anymore after this. I'm tired of feeling like this. I miss my daughter. I miss my mom. I just want to go home. These are just some of the nicer things. Believe me, there were so much more hateful things that I would say in my mind, and for every statement, my addiction had a retort. Such is the disease of addiction. According to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. It is considered a brain disorder because it involves functional changes to the brain circuits involved in reward, stress, and self-control. The NIDA goes on to further state that addiction is a lot like other diseases, such as heart disease. Both disrupt normal healthy functioning of an organ in the body, both have serious harmful effects, and both are in many cases preventable and treatable. If left untreated, they can last a lifetime and may even lead to death. Has anyone ever read the book Dope Sick? Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America? Perhaps maybe you've seen the Hulu adaptation known simply by Dope Sick. In the book, author Beth Macy chronicles her research into the history of addiction, the rise of the opioid epidemic, and the devastating effects addiction has had on America. For instance, did you know that in the small coal hamlet of St. Charles, Virginia, this was the testing site, if you will, for the drug OxyContin? Did you know that doctors were lied to by Purdue Pharma and the creator of OxyContin, telling physicians that less than 1% of their patients would become addicted to OxyContin? Did you know that prior to concocting OxyContin, Purdue Pharma was nothing more than a manufacturer of laxatives and earwax removal? So how did the Saxlers then become the tycoons of pain medication? Did you know that Purdue Pharma worked alongside an FDA member to create a special label for OxyContin, marketing it as less addictive, and then later they decided to give the same FDA member a position at Purdue Pharma, making 3 times the salary they were making working for the FDA. Furthermore, did you realize that the doctors that were overprescribing these highly addictive drug, OxyContin, were being given incentives to do so? What I am sure you do know is a person who became addicted to prescription pain meds after seeking treatment for an injury by a licensed physician. Those unfortunate to have later developed an addiction to heroin or fentanyl once the doctor quit prescribing were forfeited their right to choose to use. So how do you tell these people their addiction is a choice, not a disease, simply because they chose to trust their doctor, took a medication prescribed to them, and became addicted to it? How do you tell them that because they got hurt on their job or were in a car accident and took the medicine their doctor gave to them, that now all they're ever going to be is an addict and a junkie? Because it was their choice, right? This brings me to my next attack on a common misconception about being an addict, and that is, once a junkie, always a junkie. Merriam-Webster defines a junkie as a noun that is disparaging and offensive. A person who is addicted to narcotics and especially to heroin. While it is true that those with any mental health disorder, and especially an addictive personality disorder, will always be in treatment for their disorder, this phrase, once a junkie or an addict, always a junkie or an addict, is only meant to further ostracize and ridicule those who suffer from addiction. There are major differences between a person struggling with an active addiction and an addict in recovery. Yet once the word addict is mentioned, society struggles to differentiate between the two. Let's pinpoint the major differences between the two different addicts. The most major difference between someone in active addiction and an addict in recovery is the use of drugs or alcohol. An addict in recovery no longer does drugs or alcohol, and whereas someone in active addiction is still actively partaking in substances. The chemical makeup of an active addict's brains is still being altered, distorted, and manipulated by the drug of their choice, and is further being damaged by the intake of this substance. Recovering addicts' brains are beginning to mend. Brain functioning is increasing as the haze from drugs is removed by non-use. Discontinuing use allows the brain to heal itself. The brain isn't the only thing that deteriorates from prolonged drug use. Social skills and functionality also deteriorates. The active user finds themselves unable to control themselves in social settings, in professions, and within their nuclear family. This often leaves them isolated from friends and family, and often leads to them being unemployed. Recovering addicts, on the other hand, begin restoring relationships amongst their peers, family, and friends, as well as find gainful employment after prolonged abstinence from the drug they were once dependent on. The purpose for the phrase, once an addict, always an addict, is to discourage those in or seeking to be in recovery from addiction. It is meant to keep a population of individuals confined to a society stereotype, not unlike what's witnessed in stereotypes made against race, sex, religion, and so on. And as learned from experience and interaction, most stereotypes are meant to disparage, are often untrue, and are simply a means to separate individuals. This way of thinking and projection hinders recovery, healing, and growth by continuing to confine someone to their sickness rather than encourage their wellness. Failure to support an addict in recovery often leads to relapse. Failure to encourage recovery keeps an addict in active use, further subjecting them and those who have relapsed to one of the following outcomes: jails, institutions, or death. Society's solution to addiction has been, for a long time, to incarcerate or institutionalize those struggling with addiction. Should an addict die, well, then that's just saving the taxpayers some money on jails and state-ran facilities. Who doesn't like a good tax break? Why should you have to pay for someone's poor choices, right? Drug-involved offenders represent half the incarcerated population. of which there's a 75% recidivism rate. Incarceration is just continuing the cycle of addiction. Jails are not equipped to be rehabilitation centers. During my incarceration in jail, I was held and it didn't even have the means to fully staff its facility, let alone provide adequate health resources. I had an ocular infection for 2 weeks in jail that was not addressed until hours before my release. For 2 weeks, I couldn't see. Do you really think that they cared that I had gone through withdrawal or that I was jonesing for a hit? Half the population of jails are drug-related offenders, of which 3/4 return to imprisonment for drug-related offenses. This isn't working, so why do we keep using it as a means of correcting the problem? Well, as Democratic legislator Philip P. Puckett said, the problem is it easier to give money to the correction system to the tune of $1 billion in the state of Virginia alone than it is to take a couple of $1 million and provide inpatient treatment for our problem. The United States budget for imprisonment and corrections was $6.9 billion in 1980. Today, it's now $80 billion. Remember, half the incarcerated population is drug offenders, so that's $40 billion a year you're spending in taxes to fix a problem that is easily resolved with a few million. This evil is confined to no class or occupation. It numbered amongst its victims some of the best and men of all classes. Prompt action is then demanded lest our land should become stupefied by the direful effects of narcotics and thus diseased physically, mentally, and morally. The love of liberty is swallowed up by the love of opium, whilst the masses of our people would become fit subjects for a despot. Beth Macy discovered this quote by Dr. W.G. Rogers made in the Richmond, Virginia's Daily Dispatch on January 25th, 1884, while doing some research for her book Dope Sick. It's 138 years later and we're still in the midst of an opioid epidemic. Isn't it about time we change our way of thinking when it comes to how we handle addiction? Some jails are doing just that. Chesterfield County Sheriff Carl Leonard's visionary program, Helping Addicts Recover Progressively, or affectionately known as HARP, is a peer-run program within Chesterfield County Jail. HARP includes addiction recovery, counseling, therapeutic programs, and behavioral health support, and a structured transition into work release or home incarceration. This program recently gained national attention when it participated in a documentary called Jailhouse Redemption, which aired on Discovery Plus. I watched the early release of this documentary, and it is a very moving piece on the new ways of dealing with addiction within the confines of imprisonment. It also resonated because I knew a lot of the people who were being followed in the documentary during their incarceration. 2 of the ladies followed were girls I had grown up with. One was unable to continue the program due to some disciplinary issues and was sent back to the facility that I had done time at. The other girl I knew was unfortunately the young woman who dies in intake coming into the program after violating a condition of her release. While these stories are not uncommon, the focus should be on the success of this program, which has several of the participants in this documentary still doing well within the program, others who have been released and continue to do well in their recovery. The HARP program works with recovery organizations such as True Recovery that provides sober living housing for those coming out of incarceration. True Recovery is a recovery center organization that provides complete addiction recovery services and support from peer-to-peer coaching and community support meetings to as well as NARR certified recovery housing that welcomes all pathways to recovery. As the success rates of programs such as HARP continues, it would be hopeful that other jails and prisons would take on similar programs to help combat addiction and lower the rate of recidivism. Perhaps the most enlightening study done on addiction studies the effects of isolation versus community. In the 1970s, researchers experimented with animals by isolating individual rats in cages that contained 2 water bottles. In one water bottle, there was just water, regular out of the tap H2O. In the second bottle, the water was laced with heroin or cocaine. In every case, the rats would choose the contaminated or drugged water over the uncontaminated water. They would continue to use until they died. Each time, every rat succumbed to addiction and overdosed. Bruce K. Alexander, a psychologist involved in these experiments, hypothesized that if the rats were placed in a rat park with the same 2 bottles of water, but where they were among other rats, free to roam and play, to socialize and have sex, that the outcome would change. In this study, it revealed that when living in a community, the rats preferred the untainted water to that of the drug-laced water. Even in the rare occasions that the drug water was imbibed, it was done so intermittently, not obsessively, and never did they overdose and die from consumption. This outcome supports the conclusion that a social community beats the power of drugs. As stated by Dr. Sederer, the biggest problem with powerful, ubiquitous psychoactive drugs, meaning those that work on your brains and minds, is that they are so effective. In immediate and meaningful ways, they change how we feel, think, relate, and behave, or transport us away from loneliness and isolation. This is why we use them. It is also why campaigns of just say no are naive and ineffective, and why the dilemma of taking drugs, legal and illicit, has become one of the dominant societal dilemmas we face in the 21st century. If Rat Park teaches us anything, it is that humans, not just rats, need to be part of a community. We need to be able to relate and to be encouraged, to have support from others. Before concluding, I want to bring awareness to one final stigma in addiction and recovery, and that is the use of medication-assisted treatments, or MATs. What is an MAT, you ask? An MAT is a medication-assisted treatment used to control cravings or to block opioid receptors in the brain. You may have heard of several of these medications: Suboxone, methadone, Vivitrol, and in the states where it has been legalized, its use, marijuana, are just a few that help reduce the rates of relapse and overdose. There are many people outside and within the recovery community that believe that MATs substitute or replace one drug for another. Vivitrol, an opiate blocker and an anti-craving injection administered every 30 days, has no abuse potential. It has no street value. It has an ever-increasing success rate among heroin users now in recovery. While it is true that there is potential for abuse with MATs such as methadone or Suboxone, studies done by the NIDA have shown that there are superior outcomes when patients are treated with maintenance medications such as buprenorphine or methadone. The real problem with MATs is the lack of coverage provided by medical insurance, the resistance to incorporate them into incarcerations, or the allowance of them to be used during outpatient treatments like IOPs. Without these drugs, 50% of addicts removed from MATs relapse. Can recovery be accomplished without medicated assisted treatment? Well, yes. Is it as effective? Dr. Mark Fishman, a Johns Hopkins researcher and an MAT provider, says that AA and NA are not scalable solutions in an epidemic like this, and most opioid addicts can't do it without MATs. In recovery, the most important lesson to learn and to hold on to is that recovery is not linear. Sure, some people can kick the habit without the use of medication, others cannot. What's important is that these people are getting treatment and seeking recovery rather than continue the cycle of drug abuse. By addressing these misconceptions and stigmas surrounding addiction, we change the negative narrative society has about addiction. This increases awareness and allows us to start engaging in healthy solutions that to this ever-increasing societal problem. We cannot continue to outcast the addicted in our society. We must reconnect these individuals with their community. According to the Recovery Research Institute, addiction affects approximately 20 million individuals in the United States. 1 in 10 report their own recovery or confrontation with addiction. These are parents, these are children, these are spouses, family, and friends. Not a single person in the U.S. can say they haven't been confronted with addiction in one way or another. The only way to combat this is to come together, not continuing to turn our backs as a society on an epidemic that is literally terminating my generation. In conclusion, I leave you with this quote from psychologist Bruce K. Alexander. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Our whole society, the engine of it, is geared toward making us connect with things and not people. Drug addiction is a subset of that. Thank you for listening to me speak.